The message came at 11:42 p.m. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Tell Chloe I love her. Darren was already on his feet, phone shaking in his hand. His wife, Natalie, wasn't in bed. The bathroom, empty. Closet, closed but undisturbed. Guest room, dark. He ran downstairs barefoot, nearly tripping on the bottom step. Her purse was still on the counter. Keys were gone. The garage was open, and the car was missing. His chest hollowed out. The message blurred as he stared at it again, hoping he'd read it wrong. But the words were the same. He'd heard her say it once, years ago, late at night when they were both pretending not to cry. If I ever disappear, you'll know where to find me. He knew where. He grabbed his keys, heart pounding so hard it hurt. He didn't put on shoes. He didn't lock the front door. He just drove. The bridge was 15 minutes away, longer if there was traffic. But at midnight, there was only cold asphalt and too much silence. Every mile dragged a scream through his chest. She hadn't said goodbye. Not really. Just that line, tell Chloe I love her. Headlights swept over the steel rails as he turned onto the bridge. No cars. No figure. Just the sound of wind skimming water. He stopped the car sideways across both lanes and jumped out, phone clenched tight, eyes scanning the edge. Natalie. Nothing. His voice echoed back, cruelly intact. He took a step toward the railing, and then his phone buzzed again. He glanced down, and time warped. The message wasn't from Natalie. It was from Chloe's number. What are you talking about? He stood completely still, the night pressing in on all sides. He blinked hard and checked again. Same thread. Same words. But now it said Chloe, not Natalie. His hand went numb. He backed out of the thread. The message was listed under Chloe's name. Not forwarded. Not shared. It was hers. He called her. Straight to voicemail. His voice broke in the cold. No. No. He got back in the car, turned hard, and gunned it toward home, tires shrieking. He didn't feel his bare foot hit the gas. Didn't feel the cold air slicing through the open driver's window. All he felt was the sudden, blinding certainty that something had twisted beneath the surface of his own family, and he had missed it completely. When he burst through the front door, the silence hit him like a slap. He ran up the stairs. Chloe's bedroom door was closed. Light under it. Locked. He pounded. Chloe. Open the door. Nothing. He slammed his shoulder into it. Once. Twice. Though it splintered and gave way. She was on the floor, earbuds in, hoodie up, legs pulled in close. Her head snapped up, wide-eyed. What are you doing? She shouted. He didn't answer. He was already holding out the phone. This, he said, voice shaking. You sent this. She looked at the screen. Her face drained of color. I didn't send that. It's from your number. I swear to God, Dad. I didn't. He turned to her phone on the dresser. Same model. Same lock screen. He picked it up. Same message. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Tell Chloe I love her. Same timestamp. He stared at it. She stood up slowly, hands half raised like she wasn't sure if she was in trouble or danger. Why would I send that to you? She asked, voice cracking. Why would I talk about myself like that? He didn't answer. He didn't know how to. He looked at her face. Pale, scared. Not crying, but close. She looked like a kid who just walked into someone else's nightmare. And for a split second, he wished she was lying. Because if she wasn't, then something worse was happening. He turned and left the room without another word, walked straight to the kitchen, grabbed Natalie's laptop from the counter, and opened it on the spot. Login screen. No password. He clicked through messages, search history, sync devices. He didn't even know what he was looking for yet. But something was wrong. Something deep. He looked back toward the stairs, toward Chloe's room. And he made a decision in that moment, quiet and fast and absolute. Someone in this house wasn't telling the truth. And he was going to find out who. Even if he didn't like the answer. The next morning, Darren sat at the kitchen table, Natalie's laptop open in front of him, the glow of the screen turning his face hollow. Chloe was still upstairs. He could hear her pacing. He hadn't said goodnight. Couldn't. He didn't trust himself to speak without demanding something she might not have to give. And he hated that, hated the gap that had cracked open between them like fault lines he hadn't noticed forming. The message still sat on both phones. Same timestamp. Same phrasing. No sign of it being forwarded or copied. It originated from Chloe's number, but she swore she didn't send it, and something in her voice last night made him believe that. Not fully. Not safely. But enough to keep the laptop open long after sunrise. Natalie hadn't come home. He hadn't called the police. Not yet. Not because he didn't want to, but because deep down, some ugly part of him was afraid of what they'd ask, and what he wouldn't be able to answer. The email inbox was mostly receipts and junk, group threads from Chloe's school, some old messages between Darren and Natalie about therapy schedules, arguments frozen in digital amber. One stood out. From Natalie Carter. To self. Subject, just in case. No text. Just an attachment. He clicked. It was a photo of a handwritten note. Same black ink she always used. If you're reading this, it means I failed twice. Once by staying, and once by leaving. Don't protect me. I don't deserve it. Just make sure Chloe knows I tried. Darren's stomach turned. He looked at the timestamp. Sent 2 days ago. Never opened. Never replied to. He rubbed his face, exhausted but wired. There was a message on his phone from Chloe. Can I come downstairs? He typed one word. Yeah. A minute later, her socks patted against the tile. She looked smaller than usual in an old hoodie of his, sleeves too long, but pulled halfway over her head like she was bracing for weather that hadn't arrived yet. She didn't sit. I didn't lie, she said. I know. He replied, not looking up. But you don't believe me. He closed the laptop and finally met her eyes. I believe you think you didn't send it. Chloe stiffened. That's not the same. No, he said. It's not. The room went quiet. A bird chirped somewhere outside. The kind of peace that only shows up to mock you. I don't sleepwalk, she added. And I don't text in my sleep. So unless someone hacked my phone. He interrupted, too quickly. That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. She stepped back, her arms folding across her chest like scaffolding. You think I'm losing it, don't you? I think something's wrong, and I don't have the luxury of guessing right now. Her eyes welled, but she didn't let them spill. I know I didn't write that message, she whispered. But I've thought it. I've thought every word of it. Does that make me guilty? Darren stood. The question hit him like a confession he wasn't ready for. Chloe, she held up a hand. I didn't mean I was going to do anything. Some days I don't want to be in my own head. It's loud. All the time. Like a storm that never stops moving. He took a step closer. She didn't move. You could have told me. She let out a bitter laugh. When? Between you yelling at Mom or pretending everything's fine for my sake. I didn't want to be the final crack. He flinched. I didn't know you felt like that. No, she said. You didn't ask. The words hung between them. Truth has weight, and this one dropped like a stone in water. Darren reached for the counter, steadied himself. His hand landed on the laptop again. Someone could have accessed your phone. Synced it. Sent the message to make it look like you. Why would someone do that, she asked. I don't know, he said. But I'm going to find out. Chloe hesitated. What if it wasn't just a prank or a hack? What if it was? Mom. He stared at her. What do you mean? She looked down at the floor. You said she wasn't at the bridge. But maybe she meant for us to think she was going there. Maybe she wanted to disappear. And maybe she used my number so we wouldn't go looking for her. Darren's mind raced. That message, tell Chloe I love her. It wasn't written to Chloe. It was written about her. Like an outsider. She didn't take her phone, Chloe added. I checked the tracker this morning. It's offline. Shut off completely. She left it behind. Which means she didn't want to be found. Chloe nodded. Which means maybe she's already gone. Darren stood still. 100 scenarios spinning through his head. None of them good. He didn't want to believe his wife was capable of something like this. But that note. The silence. The message from Chloe's number. It wasn't just a mystery now. It was a warning. And whether it came from Natalie or someone else. Someone was trying to tear this family apart without lifting a single visible hand. And Darren finally saw it for what it was. Not an accident. Not a breakdown. A setup. He grabbed his keys. I'm going to find out who. Chloe's voice was small behind him. What if you don't like what you find? He didn't look back. I'd rather be hurt by the truth, he said, than safe in a lie. Then he walked out the door. The receptionist at the phone store barely looked up when Darren walked in, until he dropped 2 phones onto the counter. I need to know if this number was spoofed. She blinked, confused. Spoofed, copied, hacked, cloned, whatever word you want. I just need to know if this text, he tapped Chloe's screen, was really sent from this phone. She hesitated. That's not something we usually check. Please, he said. I'm not looking to press charges. I just need the truth. She took the phones and disappeared into the back. Darren stood by the counter, every muscle tense, fighting the urge to pace. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. When she came back, her expression was different, more careful. "We checked the logs," she said, keeping her voice low. That message wasn't sent from the device. It originated from a synced iCloud session. Someone logged in using Chloe's credentials remotely. His throat tightened. When? About 3 days ago. It stayed logged in until sometime last night. Can you see where it was accessed from? She hesitated. We're not supposed to. Please. She turned the screen toward him. There it was. A session logged in from a laptop in his house. Not Natalie's. Not Chloe's. His. He stared at it, sick rising in his stomach. Can you print that? He asked. She nodded. 10 minutes later, he sat in his car with the page in his lap, the login date circled. The realization felt like glass in his chest. Someone used his laptop to send that message from Chloe's account, which meant either Natalie had access to his machine, or Chloe had given her password to someone who did. He thought of the night Natalie asked to borrow his computer. Just for a few minutes, she said. Claimed hers was updating. Claimed she needed to pay a bill. He'd thought nothing of it. Until now. He drove straight to Natalie's sister's house. She hadn't been there, either, not officially, but it was the only place he hadn't checked. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but her sister was home. Darren, Marie said, surprised. What are you? Is Natalie here? No. You're sure? Marie stepped outside and closed the door behind her. What's going on? She sent a suicide message from Chloe's number, then disappeared. Marie's eyes widened. What? He held up the paper. She used my laptop. She had Chloe's password. I didn't know she had your laptop. Did she ever say anything to you? Anything about leaving? About feeling unstable? Like she might hurt herself? Marie's face went blank, then still. No, she said. Too fast. You hesitated. I didn't. Marie. She looked away. She asked if I had space. A few days ago. She said she needed to think. But she never showed up. Why didn't you call me? Because she told me not to, Marie snapped. She said if I told you, she'd never forgive me. That she needed distance. Space to breathe. Darren's voice dropped. And now she's missing. So where did she go? I don't know. He turned to leave. Darren, wait. He stopped. Marie swallowed hard. She said something else. Something I didn't understand at the time. What? She said. He thinks this is about me. But it's not. He stared at her. The sentence burned like acid. She said that. Marie nodded. She said it wasn't about her? Yeah. Like there was something else going on. Like she was covering for something or someone. Darren stepped back from the porch. The message. The fake origin. The timing. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a redirection. A flare sent to the wrong part of the sky. He got in the car, fingers trembling as he scrolled through Chloe's contact history. One name caught his eye. It appeared over and over again in recent calls and messages. Aiden. He didn't recognize the name. Didn't belong to any of her school friends. He called the number. It rang once, then went a voicemail. No name. Just leave a message. He didn't. Instead, he texted Chloe. We need to talk. Now. Who's Aiden? The dots appeared instantly, then disappeared. Then came the reply. I was going to tell you. That was all she said. Not who he was. Not why he mattered. Just that she'd been hiding him. Darren leaned back in the seat, heart thudding. Everything Natalie had done, every strange glance, every retreat, the message, the disappearance, it all pointed to one thing. She was trying to protect Chloe. From something. Or someone. And now Darren wasn't sure if the danger was outside their house. Or already inside it. Darren didn't knock when he got home. He slammed the door open so hard it rattled the frame. Chloe was at the kitchen table, hoodie up, fingers tapping at something on her laptop. She looked up like she knew what was coming. Aiden, he said flatly. Now. She didn't argue. Didn't stall. Just closed the laptop and said, he's someone I talked to. Online. You've never mentioned him. Because you would have made it weird. Chloe, your mother just faked a suicide message and vanished. Using your number. And now there's a random guy texting you at all hours, and you're saying you hid him from us. He's not random, she snapped, eyes flashing. And I didn't hide him. I just didn't want you to ruin it. Darren sat across from her, voice steady, low. Start from the beginning. She hesitated. Then, I met him in a support group chat. For teens. Anxiety, depression, all that stuff. He was one of the moderators. Older. She nodded. How much older? She didn't answer. Chloe. 21. Darren's jaw locked. That's not a conversation, that's grooming. No, she said quickly, too quickly. He's not like that. You're 16. He never asked for anything inappropriate. Never pressured me. He listens, Dad. That's it. He listens. Darren's voice cracked. And what did you tell him? Stuff I can't say to you. Stuff I didn't know how to say to Mom. His stomach twisted. Did he ever ask you to keep it secret? No, she said. I chose that. He leaned back, fist clenched in his lap. Did your mother know? Chloe hesitated. Darren sat forward again. Did she? No. Yes, she whispered. She found out about a month ago. How? She walked in while we were on a call. She freaked. Took my phone. Messaged him pretending to be me. Said we couldn't talk anymore. Darren's pulse thudded in his ears. So Natalie knew about him. Knew what he was to you. And then this week, a fake suicide note goes out under your name, and she disappears. Chloe nodded slowly, eyes filling. She didn't trust him. Thought he was dangerous. But I didn't see it like that. I felt safe. For the first time in a long time. Safe enough to talk about suicide? Chloe's face crumpled. He regretted the sharpness instantly but didn't take it back. I didn't plan anything. But yeah, I talked about it. With him. I told him sometimes it felt like I was barely borrowing time. Darren covered his mouth with both hands. The image of her saying those words to a stranger, while he sat in the next room pretending their life was stable, split something in him. Did Mom see those messages? I think so, Chloe said. She didn't say it, but I could tell. Something changed after that night. She started watching me all the time. Like I was a time bomb. What else did she do? Chloe pulled out her phone. Unlocked it. Opened the photo gallery. Tapped a video. It showed Natalie sitting at Darren's laptop in the kitchen, typing something. She didn't know she was being recorded. I turned on the camera after I caught her using my phone. I didn't know what she was doing, but I felt weird about it. Like she wasn't just trying to protect me, like she was trying to control the story. The timestamp on the video matched the exact time the message had been sent. Darren stared at it, disbelief giving way to something colder. The kind of clarity that only arrives when you're too far in to deny anything anymore. She sent it, he said. She used your name, your pain, and then she vanished. She thought it would scare you, Chloe whispered. That maybe it'd scare me too. Scare me away from him. Did it? Chloe hesitated. Yes, but not the way she wanted. Darren leaned back, suddenly exhausted. We need to find her. Chloe shook her head. She doesn't want to be found. I don't care. She crossed a line. You don't fake suicide to make a point. Chloe's voice shook. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been walking around all week feeling like I'm living in someone else's panic attack? He looked at her and finally saw it, not defiance, not even grief. Just bone-deep fatigue. A kid carrying a weight that was never hers. I thought I was protecting you, he said quietly. You were protecting your version of me, she replied. Not the one that actually exists. Darren didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and hollow. Where would she go? Chloe asked. He stared out the window. She wouldn't go far. Not without watching US. She's not gone, Chloe. She's hiding. Chloe wiped her eyes. Then what now? Darren looked at the laptop. At the video. At the text still sitting on both phones like a loaded gun no one fired. We stop playing defense, he said. We start asking why. Chloe narrowed her eyes. You think she was scared of something? I think she was willing to make us believe the worst. Which means she was hiding something worse. He stood. This time, when Chloe asked where he was going, he answered. To talk to Aiden. Her voice caught. You found him? No, he said. But I know how to make him find me. Darren opened a new account that night under a fake name, posing as a 16-year-old girl. The profile photo was pulled from a royalty-free site, soft light, hoodie, dark hair tucked behind one ear. The bio was short. Feeling stuck. Need someone who gets it. He joined the same forum Chloe had mentioned, found the teen mental health threads, and waited. He didn't have a plan past that. Just bait. And the sick knowledge that whoever Aiden was, he wouldn't stay quiet for long. Chloe didn't like it. When he told her what he was doing, she said, that's not justice. That's revenge. No, Darren said. Revenge would be telling him I'm her father before I ask him where he lives. She flinched. You think he hurt her? I think he made her need him. That's worse. But it wasn't just about Aiden anymore. Not really. It was about Natalie. The message, the silence, the slow unraveling of trust inside their house. Darren had missed something Natalie had seen. And instead of talking, she staged a vanishing act and made their daughter the centerpiece of it. 3 days passed. Then Aiden messaged the fake account. Hey, Saw your post. You okay? I'm Aiden. You can talk to me. Darren stared at the screen. His stomach turned, not because of what was written, but because of how familiar it felt. The same calm wording Chloe had described. The same timing. The same entry point. A thread pretending to be lifeline. He waited an hour before replying. I don't sleep. It's just noise all the time. Can't think straight. Aiden replied in less than 5 minutes. That's normal. Happens when your brain's always running threat mode. You probably feel safer when no one's around, right? Darren didn't answer right away. He let the thread breathe, studying Aiden's tone. Gentle. Measured. Almost like a therapist, but one who didn't have a license and never asked for parental permission. The next night, Darren responded. I used to feel okay with my mom around. Not anymore. She's always watching. Yeah, Aiden wrote back. It's hard when they pretend to help, but just make it worse. Darren's hands clenched. Chloe had said almost the exact same thing. He replied again. She thinks I'm broken. You're not. But it helps to talk. Want to switch to a more private app? Just easier than forums. There it was. The shift. A move from support to isolation. Darren screenshotted everything. Then he opened Chloe's messages. She hadn't responded to Aiden in over a week, but his last unread text was still there. You okay? I miss you. He sat back, breathing shallow, every part of him buzzing with the wrongness of it. The manipulation wasn't loud. It was quiet, wrapped in care. The kind of slow grooming that felt like trust until it wasn't. That night, he called Natalie's sister again. No small talk. I need to know where she is. I told you, she didn't come here. But she contacted you. Marie hesitated. Yes. When? A week ago. Said she was staying somewhere safe. Wouldn't say where. Was it local? I think so. She asked if I could bring her something. What? An old laptop. Her backup. Darren's voice dropped. Did you? Yes, Marie admitted. I left it in a locker at the train station. She gave me the number. It was all very deliberate. What was on it? Marie didn't speak. Darren gripped the phone tighter. Marie. What did she say? She said Chloe's been in danger for longer than we realized. That you wouldn't believe her if she told you. That you'd blame her. His voice cracked. Why would she say that? I don't know. But she didn't sound unwell, Darren. She sounded resigned. He hung up and drove straight to the station. Found the locker. Entered the number. Inside was the laptop. No case. No note. Just the machine and a sticky note taped to the screen. If you're reading this, it means I was right to run. Back home, he powered it up. Password protected. But Chloe guessed it in 3 tries, Natalie's mother's name, and the year she died. The desktop was clean. Just one folder. Labeled. Chloe. Threads. Darren opened it. Inside were screenshots. Hundreds of them. Every message between Chloe and Aiden. Every voice memo. Every shift in tone. Every time Chloe mentioned feeling numb, lost, scared. And Aiden's replies, laced with empathy and subtle rewrites of reality. You're not crazy. You're just surrounded by people who don't get it. Sometimes the only way out is to disappear. They don't deserve your trust. Darren's heart stopped as he scrolled. Then one audio file, marked Do Not Ignore.mp3. He hit play. A voice Aiden's. Older than Darren expected. Mid-20s. Calm, rehearsed. I know you're scared. But this doesn't have to be a goodbye. Just step away. See who comes looking. If they really love you, they'll find you. If not, you'll know. The file ended. Chloe was behind him now, reading over his shoulder. I thought he was helping me, she whispered. Darren couldn't speak. Because Natalie hadn't faked that message out of malice. She'd done it to sever the thread. To scare Chloe out of his grip. And now she was the one who'd disappeared. All to protect the daughter Darren thought he'd already saved. He hadn't cried since Natalie left. Not when the message came through. Not when he stood on the bridge thinking he was too late. Not even when Chloe whispered, I've thought every word of it. But now, staring at a screen full of someone else's words fed to his daughter like medicine, Darren felt his throat close around something he couldn't name. Guilt, maybe. Rage. Or the slow realization that he'd failed in the quietest, most dangerous way by assuming love was enough. I should have seen it, he said, not to Chloe but to the room. She didn't answer. You were sitting right here, he went on. Every day, at this table. And I thought what? That if I kept things moving, kept the bills paid, kept your mother from falling apart, it meant you were fine too. Chloe sat across from him, face pale but calm. I didn't know how to ask for help without sounding broken. You shouldn't have had to ask. She looked away. It's not your job to read my mind. No, he said quietly. It was my job to know when something was wrong. He closed the laptop. The silence between them had weight now, like two people realizing the fight they'd been in wasn't against each other, but against something neither of them saw coming. She didn't disappear to punish us, Chloe said after a while. She disappeared because she thought that was the only way to cut the cord. Darren nodded. And she didn't trust me to help. Would you have believed her? If she said this guy was dangerous? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Chloe folded her arms, pulled the sleeves down past her wrists like she used to when she was little. I don't blame you. Not completely. But you have to stop pretending we're okay just because things look okay. He rubbed his eyes. I don't know how to be anything else. Then figure it out. Because I can't be the reason you learn how to show up. That landed harder than anything else had. She wasn't angry, just exhausted, and honest, and somehow still braver than he'd ever been at her age. You know what scares me most? He said, barely above a whisper. That she left because she believed I wouldn't change. Then prove her wrong. He looked up. Not by finding her, Chloe added. By becoming someone worth finding. He nodded slowly. That was the mirror moment, where he had to stop looking outward for someone to blame, someone to save, someone to chase. It wasn't Aiden. Wasn't Natalie. Wasn't even Chloe. It was him. All the signs had been there. Chloe pulling away. Natalie trying to reach him, then giving up. The slow erosion of connection hidden under daily routines. He'd been managing the house like a system, not a family. Making sure everything worked, but not asking if anyone was okay. That night, Darren sat alone in the living room and did something he hadn't done in years. He wrote a letter. Not to Natalie. Not to Aiden. To Chloe. He told her the truth, that he'd been scared too. That he'd spent so much energy trying to hold everyone together. He never noticed when the foundation cracked beneath them. That he didn't know how to fix it, but he was willing to listen now. Not talk. Not solve. Just listen. He folded the letter and slid it under her bedroom door. Then he opened his own laptop and typed Natalie's name into a new email. Subject line, I was wrong. He didn't beg her to come home. Didn't ask where she was. He just wrote what she needed to hear 6 months ago. You saw it before I did. You took action when I froze. I thought I was holding us together, but all I was doing was standing still. I understand now why you left. And I'm not writing to bring you back. I'm writing to say thank you. For protecting our daughter when I didn't know how. I'll keep her safe now. I promise. Whether you come home or not. He clicked send. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like failure. It felt like space. The next morning, as he poured Chloe's coffee into a mug she never used, but had never thrown out, she walked in holding the letter. She didn't say anything. Just nodded once, small and tired. I'm trying, he said. I know, she replied. Then her phone buzzed. She picked it up, stared at the screen. It's from Mom. Darren's breath caught. What does it say? Chloe looked at him, eyes wide. She wants to meet. But not at home. Where? Chloe handed him the phone. It was a map pin. A park. On the other side of town. One bench marked in red. 1 hour from now. The bench was empty when Darren arrived. A modest park, tucked behind a library and half a dozen apartment buildings, shaded by old sycamores and half-hearted sunlight. A quiet place. Intentional. Natalie had chosen it for a reason. He sat down and kept his hands still, even though everything in him wanted to pace, to check the time again, to practice what he might say. But he didn't. He just waited. And when she finally appeared, hood up, no makeup, a worn canvas bag over her shoulder, he didn't stand. He let her come to him. She sat at the far end of the bench, hands in her lap. For a full minute, they didn't speak. Then she said, I wasn't sure you'd come alone. I wanted to, he said. But Chloe made me promise. Natalie gave a sad half-smile. She always knew how to keep us honest. He nodded. She's stronger than either of us realized. She always was, Natalie said. We just stopped seeing it. He studied her profile. She looked tired, but clear-eyed. Not broken. Not afraid. Just settled. Like someone who had finally stopped trying to be anything other than what she was. You were right, Darren said. About Aiden. About Chloe. Natalie didn't respond. She was still watching the trees across the field. She showed me everything. The messages. The audio. You weren't paranoid. You were ahead of me. I wasn't trying to be ahead of anyone, she said. I was trying to keep her alive. You did more than that. Natalie turned to face him. Do you know how close she was? To believing every word he said? I know. No. Darren, she said, voice low but sharp. You think you know, but you don't. Because you weren't the one reading between the lines. You weren't the one checking her search history, waking up at 3 a.m. just to make sure she was still breathing. He swallowed hard. Why didn't you tell me? I tried. You heard what you wanted to hear. I thought I was keeping things stable. No, she said. You were keeping things quiet. Not the same thing. He didn't argue. He couldn't. I sent that message, she continued. From her number. I know it was wrong, but I needed a disruption. Something loud enough to shake you loose. And honestly, I didn't trust myself to say it outright. You scared the hell out of us. I know. But if I just disappeared without warning, you would have called the cops, told Chloe I was unstable, blamed it on stress. You would have wrapped it in something digestible. He didn't deny it. You made me the villain, she said quietly. Because it was easier than facing what you'd missed. He nodded. And now I want to come home, she said. But not to the life we had. Darren looked at her, startled. I'm not saying I forgive everything, she added. Or that we pick up where we left off. That life's gone. But Chloe needs both of us. And I need to know that if I step back into that house, we're not pretending anymore. We won't, he said. I can't. You can't, she said. You just finally won't. He let that sit. Then asked, what about Aiden? I reported him anonymously, she said. To the forum moderators, to the app, even to his employer. He's not just a predator. He's smart. Calculated. But now he's on their radar. If he tries it again, it won't be invisible. Darren stared at the ground. You shouldn't have had to do that alone. I did it because you wouldn't. Silence fell again, heavier this time. But not hostile. Just honest. What do we tell her? He asked. We tell her the truth. That we're not perfect. That we're trying. That we're choosing her over being right. Darren nodded slowly. She asked me something the other day. She said, what if Mom doesn't come back? Natalie looked at him. What did you say? I told her I'd stop waiting for perfect and start making it safe for you to come home. Her eyes softened. For the first time, he saw the woman he married not as someone he failed to keep, but as someone he might still walk beside, if he learned how. She stood, slung the bag over her shoulder. I'll come home tomorrow, she said. Tell her that. I will. She hesitated. And Darren, don't just be there. Be present. He stood too, but didn't follow her when she turned to leave. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small folded piece of paper, the letter he'd written to Chloe and copied for himself. One sentence circled at the bottom. Start with showing up, then stay long enough to matter. He read it again before putting it back. Then he sat alone on the bench a little longer. Just long enough to mean it. The door creaked open just after 9 a.m. Chloe was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under her, pretending to scroll her phone, though she hadn't looked at the screen in 5 minutes. Darren stood in the kitchen, turning off the burner on a pan of eggs he hadn't touched. When Natalie stepped inside, no one moved at first. No rush. No apology. Just the sound of someone returning to a life that would never go back to what it was. She dropped her keys in the dish by the door, same motion, same sound, but this time, it didn't feel routine. It felt like a question. Chloe looked up, met her mother's eyes, and nodded once. Then she stood and walked into her room, not cold, not dismissive, just giving space. Darren crossed the room slowly. She doesn't hate you. Natalie slid her shoes off. I know, but she doesn't trust me yet, either. She doesn't trust much of anything right now. Then we build from that, one piece at a time. The hours that followed weren't dramatic. There was no big conversation, no three-way breakdown, no group hug. Just movement. Chloe came out of her room around lunchtime, said she was hungry. Natalie asked if she wanted to go out or stay in. Chloe shrugged. Whatever's easiest. They ended up at the same diner they used to go to after dentist appointments. Cheap coffee, sticky menus, red vinyl booths that squeaked when you shifted too fast. For the first 10 minutes, no one said much. Then Chloe asked if they remembered the time she threw up on the jukebox. That cracked something. Darren laughed. Natalie shook her head. And slowly, they started to feel like people again, not just broken pieces in the same house. That night, Natalie took the guest room. No questions. No drama. Just a quiet goodnight down the hall. Chloe shut her door without another word. And Darren sat on the back porch alone, sipping water, watching condensation bead on the glass. A week ago, he thought the world was collapsing. Now he realized it had been collapsing for years. He'd just been too good at standing in the rubble pretending it was still a house. The next morning, Chloe asked him if she could delete her old group chat. You sure? He asked. Yeah. I don't want to keep talking to ghosts. He handed her the laptop. Let her do it herself. Watched as she hovered over the delete button, then clicked it without ceremony. Just another step forward. Later that day, Darren sat with Natalie at the kitchen table, 2 cups of coffee between them. No laptops. No phones. I read something this morning, she said. It said sometimes healing doesn't feel like a miracle. It feels like maintenance. He nodded. That sounds right. They sat in silence for a while. You know what scares me? Natalie said. What? That we'll survive all of this, but go back to how things were. Pretending not to notice when something's broken. Calling it resilience. We won't, Darren said. Not if I have anything to say about it. She looked up at him, cautious. I know I didn't see it, he continued. Not the way you did. Not the way Chloe needed me to. But I'm done performing stability. I want to be someone who listens the first time. You say that like it's easy. It's not. But it's real. They sat with that truth, drinking quiet coffee, until Chloe came in asking if they could do a family session. Just once. Together. No prep. No pretending. Darren looked at Natalie. Natalie looked at Chloe. And then they both said yes. The appointment was 2 days later. The therapist was kind but firm, the room softly lit but not overly staged. The 3 of them sat in a triangle. No couch, no hierarchy. The session didn't fix anything. But it started something. Chloe talked. Not about Aiden. Not yet. But about the pressure of being the strong one. About pretending not to notice when her parents were unraveling. Because she was afraid if she said something, they'd finally fall apart. Natalie talked. About the guilt. The exhaustion of carrying a family on a foundation that wasn't as solid as it looked. And Darren listened. He didn't try to reframe. Didn't interrupt. Didn't explain his way out of anything. He just sat in it. At the end, the therapist asked if they wanted to set goals. Chloe said, I want to feel safe at home again. Natalie said, I want to stop parenting from fear. And Darren, after a long pause, said, I want to stop trying to be the hero and start being someone worth trusting. The therapist nodded. No applause. No breakthrough. Just a soft, we'll work on that. That night, Chloe fell asleep with her door cracked open for the first time in months. Natalie stayed in the guest room again, but left the hallway light on. And Darren sat on the floor in his room, not to punish himself, not because he couldn't sleep, just to feel what it meant to be still. The message that broke everything open hadn't been a cry for help. It had been a mirror. And for once, Darren didn't look away. He finally understood what Natalie had meant when she left. You can love your family and still lose them if you're not willing to change. And the person who saves them is the one who chooses to change anyway. I thought I was keeping us safe. I didn't realize I was keeping us stuck.